After what felt like an eternity of waiting, a magically amplified voice could suddenly be heard, dimming the raucous crowd.
The next fight will be a clash of titans.
The portcullis rose, and Bruckner stepped out onto the field of battle.
An all-out melee between our very own Pyrm Greatshield.
The crowd roared in approval.
Then a newcomer to our arena, Johannes Bruckner, the Black Blade.
The crowd continued its cheering, but it was now more expectant than celebratory. Opposite him on the other side of the pitch, he could see a tall man wearing a plumed helmet. A heavy mace rested against his shoulder, and he was carrying a massive tower shield dyed red, a dragon's fiery maw etched into the metal. Bruckner moved 20 feet forward, then stopped and raised his sword in front of his face by way of salute. The crowd cheered in recognition of his chivalrous gesture. In response, Pyrm gave a deep military bow, then whirling his great shield with surprising dexterity, in a crowd-pleasing show of prowess, he began to run towards Bruckner down the field, covering 60 feet, placing him 120 feet away from Bruckner, who moved another 20 feet forward. Pyrm was moving swiftly for a heavily armored man, but Bruckner took his time, watching the way the larger shielded man carried himself. Soon they were only 40 feet away, with Pyrm closing the distance fast. Pyrm drew up to a distance of 40 feet, studying Bruckner. Then the Cormorantian suddenly charged. With a warrior's cry, Bruckner leapt forward in a charging dash, closing the distance between himself and Pyrm, and bringing his sword down in a focused arc aimed at his foe's shoulder between the joints of his banded armor. The gladiator was taken aback by the speed of the youth's attack, and he attempted to bring up his shield to parry, but was a fraction of a second too slow, and the Cormorantian sword bit deep, finding the place where plates met and biting into his shoulder. Pyrm staggered back a half step, then with a mighty roar swung his heavy mace with the full force of his body. But the large man put too much into the swing, the clench of his shoulders and positioning of his feet telling Bruckner clearly where the strike would land. He ducked deftly under the whistling mace head. The crowd was coming alive now, and Bruckner redoubled his attack. Pyrm was off balance after his heavy swing, and the youth quickly skirted to his side and stabbed deep, right above the hip, piercing the banded male. He pulled his sword out of the man's bone with a jerk, dripping blood onto the dusty ground. The large warrior turned, howling in pain and rage, and tossed his shield aside, grabbing his mace in both hands, swinging it downward toward the crown of Bruckner's unarmored head. As he swung, he slipped on one of the leather straps of his shield, now lying in the dirt, and he nearly toppled over, the swing going wide. As Pyrm lost his balance, Bruckner sliced towards his unprotected throat, but the man got a gauntleted arm between the blade and his vital spot, and the black sword glanced with a loud clang off of his armored forearm. Pyrm fell backwards, regaining his shield and clumsily retaking his feet, fending off another strike with his mace as he attempted to regain solid footing. The crowd was showing its support for the bloody spectacle. A chorus of voices was chanting, "Pyrm! Pyrm! Pyrm!" in support of the Great Shield. But to his pleasant surprise, Bruckner also noted some strong voices crying out for the Black Blade. Pyrm swung once again, his mace whirling through the air like a streak of silver wind, but Bruckner brought his own shield up, catching and redirecting the weapon head. The fight was raging in earnest now as the combatants exchanged blows, sparks showering from the clangs of metal on metal. Bruckner thrust forward, the tip of his sword aimed at the breach in his armor above the hip opened earlier. Pyrm smashed the incoming blow away with a powerful parry from his mace. He followed it up with a backhand slam aimed at Bruckner's cheek, but the heavily armored man was too slow to lay a hand on the youth. Bruckner swung and swung, but for a time could only seem to find the shield, an ever-present wall of steel. Then he spied an opening, scoring a deep hit, hacking down through the rent in Pyrm's armor he had opened earlier. A stream of blood sprayed out as his adamantine blade buried deep. Pyrm appeared to be dying on his feet at this point, but he managed to swipe at Bruckner with a powerful strike that jarred the bones in Bruckner's shield arm, nearly knocking him off of his feet. It was a hard blow to absorb, and the force of it rattled his shield mightily, but he stood firm. Stepping out of the way of a last weak swing, Bruckner brought his sword over his head, the sunlight glinting off the tip of the black blade, and with a warrior's roar, he brought it down upon his opponent's crested helm, which split in two under the force of the blow, sparks showering on the ground. The man fell backwards, blood and gray matter spraying from the canyon cloven into his helmet, with a low grunt to slam prone into the ground. The crowd exploded, the cheers for the Black Blade buffeting around young Johannes like strong winds. Clerics of Varian rushed to the side of Pyrm, quickly resuscitating him. He stood shakily and was led off the field by the clerics. The crowd chanted Bruckner's name as his fallen opponent's blood dripped to the sand from his outstretched sword. Bruckner raised his sword and shield in salute to the crowd. They were enthused, calling his name and Black Blade madly. This has been episode 7 of Greenleaf and the Black Blade, written, edited, and narrated by Andrew Israelsen. Additional voices by Jared Israelsen, Penny James, and Nick Smith. Music by Patrick Grafton Cardwell. Please tune in next time.